So the purpose of this video is to help you guys understand the 3 ways that you can build your own final expense agency. I started in the business in 2011 and began building my final expense agency, which is known as DeFord Insurance Group, in 2013. And I've learned a lot of things along the way. And there are different ways to build your very own agency, depending on what processes and strategies you're comfortable with. So we're going to go into detail on those and how those work so you can better, plan for the future on how to build your very own agency. Of course, my name is David DeFord. I own DeFord Insurance Group. Our specialty is training final expense agents, whether they want to sell over the phone or in person, with a specialization in one-on-one mentorship to help you become the best that you can be. If you'd like to learn more about that, daviddeford.com/FAQ. And lastly, if you want to watch these videos live as we record them, you can join my insurance sales success site. It's for anybody anywhere in the world that wants to learn more about selling insurance. We've got tons of free resources, probably the best and the most resources on the face of the planet, freely available to agents everywhere. There's no catch. No obligations, nothing to buy. You can register a free account at daviddeford.com/ISS. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So there are, like I said, 3 different processes to start your own final expense agency. But again, if you're wanting to build a mortgage protection agency or a Medicare agency or whatever, it doesn't really matter so much about the type of product you're selling. The same fundamentals are going to apply to all of them. So I don't really care what you're interested in selling or recruiting people to sell to. Let's talk about that. And let's clarify one last thing here. When I say build an agency, what I'm talking about is duplicating yourself as an agent, what you're currently doing now, into other people, staff, recruits, et cetera, who are a part of your agency. So like the DeFord Insurance Group, I don't sell final expense anymore. I recruit agents to sell final expense, and I parlay my knowledge and wisdom based off of firsthand experience for many years selling final expense into them with the hope that at scale, right, a lot of people go out there and do what I used to do, and so that I can scale my income commensurately, right? So that's what we're really talking about today when we're talking about building a final expense agency. So I want to make sure that's clear. Okay, so the first option, and this is probably the most common option, and there are definitely some advantages and disadvantages with it. And that is what I would call the franchise operation. Now, there's not, as far as I know, a company that franchises like, let's say, I guess there are, but not necessarily in the final expense, but like a Subway franchise, right? Where you buy the royalties or rights to then run that agency. Now, you do see that with like Allstate. You do see that with State Farm. And that is definitely for the PNC, commercial, property and casualty type of business, a viable route to go down, but with its own set of issues, as we'll definitely hit on as we go. But what we see more commonly, and many of you out there watching are in the life insurance space, are these MLM agencies that recruit en masse. Think of any 3-letter MLM out there that you've seen plastering the job boards or on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube. Their operation, in a sense, is very much like a franchise operation. Granted, there's no royalty fees to pay per se, but you're leveraging their brand and what they've established over the years to then build your own thing. And I say own loosely because, as you're going to see, there are some consequences that really don't make it 100% your own. And there are some advantages to this process of leveraging an existing agency's assets or an IMO's assets, its brand, et cetera. So first of all, the nice thing about a franchise opportunity is you tap right into the existing network of people who have already done the same thing. And there is something to be said about not having to figure this stuff out on your own. When you join a franchise operation, again, whether that's like a traditional brick and mortar like State Farm, Allstate, et cetera, or if you're with an MLM IMO, where they just train you to recruit other people to recruit and build your agency that way. There are likely some processes in place to help answer the questions that you'll eventually start to ask, like, where do I find people to recruit to? What do I do with them after they're recruited, and so forth? And having this support network, this existing training in place, absolutely shortens the learning curve of how to figure out your way and where you can position yourself as an agency operating in this business. The inverse of that is you got to figure it all out yourself if you didn't have it. And you might run out of money or time trying to figure out from scratch how to do things. So there is definitely an advantage in the franchise sense that you kind of just copy and paste an existing blueprint, an existing formula that hopefully has already been proven to work. And again, that goes to the point of you don't have to readily figure things out. And that I can't stress enough is important. We see that in a sense, recruiting agents, right? We don't want to join the insurance business as a new agent. Like, let's say that's you out there and you don't have like a blueprint of success. You got to figure this stuff out. You know, enough time will pass. It'll be very frustrating. Don't even know where to start. It's better just to copy and paste. And likewise, the same argument can be made for building an agency, but there are drawbacks. And I want to talk about this because this isn't something that's readily discussed with the franchise methodology because it is the most prominent out there. And there's a lot of people that are building their agencies within the construct of other agencies' brands. So here's what happens. In a sense, when you franchise, you are building something that's yours, but simultaneously, you're building something that is somebody else's. In other words, there are consequences long-term, and it could be never realized, but they could be too, by leveraging another's brand to establish and build yourself up, and then leveraging that brand and being associated with it. So for example, there was a very well-known IMO about, at this point, it's been close to 2 years. There is a large downline leg that had built their agency through them. And this IMO, just think of the one out there that's most well-known, you know what I'm talking about. And they said, you know what? We're tired of the way this business is getting run. We're being screwed on commissions, whatever their story was. I don't know for sure, but this is probably the stuff that they went through their minds thinking about, and ended up leaving and bringing along with them probably about 1,500 to 2,000 agents. And they just weren't able to leave. You know, they tried to leave, but then what ended up happening is that the primary IMO, as far as I understood, started putting in roadblocks, would not release agents, meaning allow those agents to move their carrier contracts from the incumbent first IMO to the new one through the now leaving downline leg. They tried to leave, but the existing IMO, in other words, made it really hard, kind of like the mafia. They love you while you're there, but they stop at nothing to let you go. So that's really what ends up happening. And that's kind of my point with the franchise operation. And I'm here to say these IMOs have a point. I mean, they did build this brand. They did build this thing that means something and is worth something. And if you take and you think that your company is completely your own and you expect to walk out the door using their stuff without a profit opportunity rewarded to the company, they're probably not going to like that. And they're probably going to put their foot down. So a lot of the times what you'll find in these franchise operations is that you have to play the game. You're, in a sense, beholden to the franchise. It is very difficult, especially if you've established something very large and very successful, to then pivot and move away. And if management changes or the culture changes and you don't like the direction where things go, that's how companies, you know, they're living, breathing things made up of people. They're going to change and you may not like it. And what you may find yourself in a position of is you may be successful, but at the same time, just don't enjoy the work that you're doing. It's not like what it used to be. And you have to basically do the corporate thing, you know, shut your mouth, not run your business, what you think is your business, really isn't, the way that you want to, because there's consequences. What if the said IMO decides to terminate you? Can you take your agents away from them? There may be contracts in place to prevent that from happening. So what turns out to be in the beginning, a wonderful concept, hey, just leverage our existing assets to run your business. The long-term consequences are that you may not be able to realize fully what's possible without litigation issues, without you being sued, or tumult that may arise from this decision of leaving. And there also another issue that, you know, usually isn't on your mind as a new agency running and using a franchise, is that there is now more than ever a huge interest in the business of private equity in the agency market. I don't know, and I'm not an economist. What I can tell you is this, especially in the senior market, you have socioeconomic factors that the only thing that could stop it is a war at this point, or the breakdown of society, where older people are growing as a percentage of the total population and will over the next 15 to 20 years. And in that growth cycle, as people enter old age, their mindsets change, their perspectives and values shift. And what this does is open the door to sales opportunities for insurance agents. So final expense, Medicare, annuities, these are all great sales opportunities, not just for the agent, but exit equity opportunities for the smart agency that wants to build a brand and wants to realize really where the significant money is on exiting the business for a nice multiple of whatever your net operating income is, or your net income, excuse me. So, but that's something that's not as clear cut if you're in a franchise operation. Some of them may offer you shares in the company or the company itself, but that may not be to the extent of what you could make if you were running your own thing, as we'll get into in a minute. So one thing I tell agencies, aspiring agency owners right now, is that if you have your own brand and you run a successful business, there are private equity companies that are, and it's competitive too, so it's driven up the return, where you take what's called your net income, which is what your agency makes. They are selling for multiples, depending on the makeup and the product and the brand itself, somewhere between 8 and 15 times earnings, EBITDA, as it's called. So if you're making $1 million a year as an agency and you've got the right setup, you may have an exit of $8 million to $15 million. Pretty significant. And the point being is, on the franchise side, you may have a nice cash cow as far as a company that's making a lot of money. But if you don't own the thing, the exit strategy may not be nearly as lucrative. So things to consider. Personally, this is part of the reason that I am my own brand. I don't franchise with anybody. Part of it was, as we'll get into and talk about the other side of this, running your own thing, is I personally am an entrepreneur through and through. My dad started his own business, sold his own business to Ecolab in 2006. He ran a business in the chemical business, and he, from scratch, created his own thing. So I kind of seen that, had the luxury of seeing this in my family, of what an exit looks like, the profound amount of money you can make, and why it's, in my opinion, better, maybe getting ahead of myself here, better to run your own thing and put your own business together, your own brand, because the exit is where really the money is in this business. Okay. So option 2 is going solo. Again, I've kind of let the cat out of the bag there. What's the going solo look like? Well, that's what DeFord Insurance Group is. This is where I started my business. I am not beholden to any IMO. Sometimes people ask me, who's your upline? Who is your kind of like running the show for you? And my answer is always like, nobody. I do have uplines, but they don't brand me or control my brand. DeFord Insurance Group is a creation of my own. How we run my business is based on my decision-making alone. And I've had full autonomy in creating this brand. And the nice thing is, if there is ever a point in my career where I wanted to exit, I do have the opportunity to do so without any sort of obstacles in a way, like my friends who run franchises. So a couple of benefits here, as we've discussed a few of them. Number one, full brand autonomy. I can't stress enough how important this is. If you're wanting to build an agency, anytime that you franchise with an organization, you run the risk of being pulled into things that happen to the owners, the runners of the company, the issues that affect the major brand. As a franchisee, you're in a position that even if you didn't cause these problems to happen, that you're a part of that. So there's a couple of examples I'll give you. Jared, the Subway guy, you guys remember him? Remember what happened to him? Remember what he did? Remember how that affected Subway franchises? Immediately, every franchisee who had bought into Subway was affiliated with this guy they brought up as their kind of figurehead, who did some terrible things. And how did it affect sales? Probably affected sales to some extent. I don't have hard numbers, but this is something that was out of the control of the franchisee. And likewise, you may be in a position where if you're a franchisee in a sense to a major company, that if something like this happens or somebody says something they shouldn't, you're immediately affected by that, even though you had nothing to do with it. I don't have that worry because I'm in control. Granted, there's good and bad with everything in life, but I'm in control of the circumstances to a much greater extent when it comes to the PR, the outward facing image that my brand perpetuates. Also, Alex Ramosi, some of you probably watch Alex Ramosi, great YouTuber, excellent content. I'm more of his fan of his older content, not so much the newer, although the newer stuff is good too. I caught one of his clips or shorts, and he said, somebody asked him, what he does is he acquires companies in a certain range and then works on building them to a higher net income in order to increase their value. But one of the things he doesn't do, based on what I've seen, is use his brand to help perpetuate and build those companies he buys into. And somebody asked him, well, why is that the case? And Alex responded, well, the reason I don't is what happens if something inside of these companies we own, there's some terrible circumstance, some dramatic thing that happens, and how does that stain Alex's brand? And likewise, the other way around too. And so his theory and the way that he operates is that he wants there to be a separation where he owns the company, but his branding isn't attached to it, so it doesn't potentially poison either way. And there's definitely some wisdom in that. So all of this is to say, to go back to what we're doing when running our own agency, is having no ties to something in a brand way that's out of your control is one of the benefits. And likewise, what that gives to you back is the ability to build your brand the way you want to. If, say, your MLM franchisee, the company you're associated with, starts pushing overpriced junk leads, saying that they're fresh, but as an insider, they're not, you're expected to toe the line. You're expected to push these leads, but you may not believe in them. It may be against kind of ethically what you believe an agent needs to have. And so now you can't control the effect that will have on the company and its image in the space of recruiting agents because you're a part of the machine. And again, these are just a few examples of the problems that come up with being associated with a brand that is not of your own doing. And along with that, we mentioned the exit strategy opportunities as well. Again, this is something that's talked about a little bit in the business, but I believe thoroughly that there is a great opportunity over the next 10 years, if you are interested in building an agency, to have multiple bidders. If you build a solid agency that's well branded, well positioned, and very profitable, to have an exit opportunity to get out of the business at some point. And that exists at its highest extent, I believe, for those who build their own brands as opposed to being franchised. So let's talk about some of the drawbacks, because I've talked a lot about why being solo, running your agency, is a good thing. Let's talk about some drawbacks to balance it out a little bit. Number one, you got to figure it all out. I mean, I started in 2013 and I was like, all right, I'm going to recruit agents. Cool. Where the hell do I find them? That was kind of like my first problem. So I had to figure out, okay, I'm going to go on this forum and this Facebook group. I got to go do this thing. And I luckily stumbled across YouTube very early on. I was like, this is kind of interesting. Let me start giving away all my goods. And maybe somebody somewhere will be attracted to that and I'll recruit them. Turned out to work really well. So you got to figure it all out. Although I will say, there are ways, if you know people in the business, like yours truly, to help you overcome and circumnavigate the pitfalls that are very common in this business. There are ways to get mentors in this business as you start your agency that will help you avoid a lot of the problems that come along with running an agency, Okay. Yeah, and that kind of goes along with the same thing. There's little to no support network that's just intrinsically in or available to agency owners. As I grew my agency, I knew a few people in the business, but we all kind of kept to ourselves. There wasn't like a support group or a coaching group or mentorship group, nothing like that. Although I think that's changed to some extent but you're not going to have, I believe, the same level of support and cut and paste systems that you would get if you're part of, like, let's say, an MLM agency, which, their whole ideal is to build, so they've got the goods. Whereas if you figure the stuff out on my own, like I did, it's going to take you more time. And the other thing, it is potentially isolating. That goes along with any business operation, less so in a franchise, but more so completely solo or independent. I don't have anybody to really lean on in this business to help me build my agency. Again, I can't stress it enough. It is something that you are ultimately responsible for figuring out. Okay, so the last iteration or option here on agency building is to do kind of what I would call, I don't really have a way to describe this, but it's to build but not have the shortcomings that come along with a franchise or a solo opportunity. And the best way I can describe how this works is to reference how working as a mentor in the Ford Insurance Group works. So there are some agencies out there who realize that, hey, it's a better opportunity to maintain our brand as opposed to training people to build other agencies that are different in brand or franchised out. But instead of having them have to figure everything out, we'll do some of the work and they'll do the other part of the work. So here's how I mean. In the Ford Insurance Group, I have 3 trainers. They are paid a wage plus bonus quarterly based off of production from their downlines. They are not responsible for recruiting. That's my job as the Ford Insurance Group, is to feed them candidates that match our culture and what we're looking for. What are they responsible for? They're responsible for the critical process of training, mentoring, and coaching these agents into top producers. And so what you have here is basically a divvying up of the duties. If you run your own agency, you're responsible for recruiting, training, support, coaching, mentoring. And at some level, what I discovered doing exactly that, up to the end of last year in 2022, is that you eventually reach a critical capacity where your job as an owner, agency owner, to work and build on your business, not so much in it, is compromised by the demands that you're required to fulfill, chief amongst them, taking care of your people. Not to say that's a bad thing. But at some point, as I had to hire people and pay them very well to do or fulfill a very important component of what it is that we do. So that's the thing that you could also consider, because building an agency is tough. Most people fail out of the business. There's also a big issue on chargebacks that you guys have to be aware of. For example, in building an agency on the franchise or the solo operation, what you're doing when you recruit people is saying, hey, look, I co-sign your debt, Mr. Stranger Agent I just met. Please don't defraud me or write bad business. And what's happened really since COVID started is that there's been way more fraud in the form of agents who write openly fraudulent business that eventually have civil and criminal lawsuits brought against them for defrauding seniors, in our case, in final expense, the agency itself, certainly the carrier too. And they end up being what I would call getting the feds involved as well, because many times they do this over multiple state lines. Long story short, you are at financial risk when you run an agency. There are loads of agencies at MLMs and truly solo agencies that regularly, I don't say regular, like every other month, but every year they may have $50,000 to $100,000 in lost income because of bad business written or fraud committed against them. So you have to keep that in mind when you go with either of those other routes. I say all this because in many of these circumstances where you come in and your sole job is just to recruit or to train people and take care of them, you don't have to worry about chargeback mitigation. There's one particular organization I'm familiar with. They pay a lower commission, but in exchange to the agency owner or the recruiter or trainer, however you want to call them. But in return, they don't have chargeback risk. And that's how we operate at the Ford Insurance Group with our trainers. The trainers get the luxury of making overrides in the form of royalties, but they don't have to worry about the chargeback. So they don't have to worry about cutting a check back to me or back to the company to cover the overrides that weren't, the debt that rolled up to them. So having this kind of quasi, running an agency, but really just responsible for one component of the process may offer the ability to mitigate the chargeback risk that is inherent in the other operations. And in some ways, this approach is arguably simpler. It's very difficult. It's complex to run a business and to worry about all elements. You have operations, you have marketing, you have support, you have training, you have mentorship. You have all these different hats you have to wear as a business owner. And if you just have to worry about one thing and you can get really good at it, and you're okay compromising the upside potential in equity and the equity exit opportunity as well as income, because you're going to earn less in this position, generally speaking, it's a good thing. It's arguably simpler. You get to worry about one thing instead of many. Also, you only have to worry about that one thing. As long as the incumbent agency you're a partner with can bring you prospects on a regular basis and keep you as busy as possible, then your opportunity is fantastic. You will have new agents every week. You don't have to worry about where to find them. You just have to worry about getting good candidates and training them sufficiently well so they can go out and close. Now, what are the drawbacks to this type of setup? Number one, no equity. Granted, you could possibly negotiate ownership in the business, or you could negotiate some kind of windfall if the business is sold or something like that. But that's something you'd have to think about or negotiate. Some of these organizations out there do offer shares or a percentage of ownership in the company after a certain period of time or production is acquired. So there's a way to partake in some percentage of an equity event where the business is sold out. It is ultimately a job. If you're like me, through and through an entrepreneur, like really, truly an entrepreneur, like 100% excited about taking full responsibility of the outcomes in your life, you wake up and like the idea, you wake up unemployed every morning, you got to go find business, then, this may not be for you because you're stuck with some of the framework of a job. You've got somebody to report to, you're responsible for hitting certain metrics and numbers. You can't run things exactly how you want to the extent that you could if you ran your own business. Again, that's going to vary by the company and kind of what their culture is like. Like, for example, I give a lot of latitude to my trainers because I trust them. I hire good people who are competent and know what they're doing, so I don't have to micromanage them. The last point is less control. So anytime that you're going to be in one of these positions, there's a lot of things very much like the franchise operation that are out of your control. You can't control the recruiting process to the same extent. You can make your thoughts known, but you're not the one out there trying to find recruits. That's up to somebody else, et cetera. So you got to be okay with less control. Okay, so some final thoughts here before we wrap this up. What's best to do? For me, again, I'm partial to owning your own business. I'm always going to say, if you've got the stuff, you should operate and build your own agency. There's way more responsibility. There's definitely more risk. But the outcome on the back end, especially in an environment now, I think especially over the next 10 years where there's a lot more private equity interest, and I think will be enhanced if there's possibly a recession and things happen economically. I think taking 5 to 10 years to build a solid agency that recruits regularly, that trains agents very well, that has a unique brand in the business, and then keeps them on and is routinely making them successful. I think building an agency like that is so lucrative. It's such a great opportunity to make great money, but also to have an opportunity to get out of the business and retire and have a nice load of cash to bring along with it. And going solo brings you that great opportunity. I do think that the kind of the hybrid approach where you're an employee and you're only responsible for one component of the agency building response is a good option too. If you really don't care necessarily either way that you want to run your own thing, but you really like the idea of leveling up your own career and having the ability to make a significant sum of money, and you're okay having a wage plus bonus situation, that might be a great compromise. You may not get the same level of equity exit that we described here earlier, but you may not be interested in that either. So that can be a great thing too. To me, my opinion, and I guess this is because I'm a hardcore entrepreneur, The last thing I would recommend for most people is the franchise opportunity. There's so many good upside benefits to it in the beginning, for sure. But the problem is it's like a vice grip. The deeper you go into it, the harder it is to leave. And the thing is that you won't ever hear publicly these franchisee operators expressing this opinion. They're playing the game, like we talked about. They're out there pushing and promoting, get recruited up, because they really don't have a choice. Because if they leave, they've got the golden handcuffs attached to them. It's too potentially negative to exit, leave, take your agents and your business that you've built. There's such significant consequence that many of these IMOs will immediately take you to court, and if anything, just drain you of your resources by paying your lawyer to fight against you trying to set up your own deal. So my advice is to find mentorship or support. Avoid the franchise opportunity. If you really like the idea of building your own brand, which you should, you don't really need these MLMs. They aren't all that in a bag of chips, as we used to say. You need to just find the resources they normally would provide you, and then provide an avenue or find an avenue that you can build your own. And the last thing I'll say here at the conclusion of this, I'm in the final steps of building a new division in my company, more of a coaching and mentorship side of the business, oriented towards aspiring agency builders and current agency builders that want to scale their business in the same way I have. So I haven't quite released it out at the filming of this, but it is something that I'm working on. You probably will hear about. So if you have any interest in that, you're welcome to reach out to me. Look for my emails. We'll be promoting it. I think it's something that this business desperately needs, because a lot of ambitious people get caught up in the wrong agencies, not just on the agent side, but the agency side. And a lot of people make a lot of mistakes when it comes to agency building that costs a lot of money. And a good mentor or coach that is truly on your side can help mitigate and avoid a lot of that.